This video is a video about my visit to Rampton High Security Hospital up in Nottinghamshire. I've been there for the last 2 days. I've just recently, last hour or two, arrived back into Bournemouth, back into this probation hostel. I'm actually moving tomorrow to London to the charity accommodation Kairos, who are helping me resettle after this 6-month period in the probation hostel after being released from custody. So this video is going to be about Rampton Hospital, and I'm going to share with you all and with all the viewers and subscribers to my channel Crime and Justice TV my experience, my insight and my thoughts about this visit to Rampton. So firstly, what I'm going to say is I'm going to tell you the reason why I went to this high secure hospital. So my reasons for going were to visit an IPP prisoner or patient. He's in a hospital, he's a patient, so he's a man serving an IPP sentence. This man's name is Sean Thomas. He received an IPP sentence in 2005. He received a minimum term of 2 years and 11 months, and he's now in his 14th year of custody, of detention, indefinite detention. He's got no release date, he's got no right to be released. So for my subscribers and worldwide viewers who have not yet to hear anything about what an IPP sentence is, so I'll explain what that is, but I won't go into it too much detail because I've got other videos on my channel about the IPP sentence, and I'll be making more content in 2019 about the IPP sentence. So I want to keep the focus on Sean Thomas and Rampton Hospital in this video. But basically, in 2003, the new Labour Blair government implemented a sentence called IPP. It's a life sentence with no release date. You can only be released once you complete your minimum term, and then the parole board deems that you're not a risk to society. The sentence has been a catastrophic failure. It's led to major loss of life, major suicides, self-harming. The sentence was given to 6,000 people. Over 2,600 of them remain detained indefinitely with no right to release. The average tariff or minimum term was only around 3 years, and the implementation of the sentence was so knee-jerk and reckless that there was never any resources or structure in place within the prison service or the probation service to deal with the devastating influx of 6,000 IPPs in a 7-year period. I say 7-year period because the sentence was active between April 2005 and November 2012, because in November 2012 the sentence was condemned at Strasbourg by the European Court of Human Rights for being arbitrary, illegal and inhumane. So the British government abolished it, but the abolishment was not retrospective. So IPP prisoners in England and Wales received a life sentence for crimes that in some cases only carried a maximum of 2 or 3 years. Also, on top of that, the sentence has actually ended up marginalising vulnerable people, and in a nutshell, if you can't read or write, or you have learning difficulties, learning disabilities or autism, speech impediments, deafness, it's just impossible to get released virtually. I mean, if you have an IQ lower than 80, and you can't engage in the risk reduction work offender behaviour courses which are accredited and recognised by the parole board, no chance of release. So yeah, it's a massacre at the moment. The short tariff IPPs who are 10 years over tariff now in prisons all over England and Wales are suffering delirium, despair, catastrophic breakdown in their mental functioning. They are living in prison healthcare units naked like dogs, covered in their own excrement, cutting their wrists and legs and throats, cutting their genitals, swallowing razor blades, and being sectioned to high secure hospitals because they're losing their minds. And once they get into the hospitals, they're then diagnosed with personality disorders, and they don't have the opportunity for a parole hearing. The average stay at Rampton Hospital is between 5 and 7 years. So these short tariff IPPs who committed these, in some cases, lower level offences, some of them did commit serious violent or sexual offences, but a lot of these short tariff IPPs who committed low level offences are now in their 13th and 14th year of indefinite detention, and are now serving longer than IRA mass killers, terrorists, and those convicted of murder, because the minimum term for murder is 15 years, so a lot of these IPPs next year will be in their 15th year. So it's a shocking, despicable, disgusting state of affairs, and it's a situation that the British government just refuse to do anything about, and they're just allowing this massacre to continue, and it's a stain on the British criminal justice system. So that's what I'm going to say about IPP at the moment. So Sean Thomas, I first met Sean Thomas, or got in touch with Sean Thomas a couple of years ago whilst I was detained at HMP Winchester on an IPP recall. So I'm an IPP as well. So in America that would be a parole violation. So I got recalled for a parole violation. There's a prison newspaper called Inside Times, and when I used to see the letters from IPPs who were 9, 10, 11 years over tariff, I would write to them just to try and network really, and just to try and find some common ground with people who could understand what I was going through. So I read a letter from Sean, started writing to him because it said the name of his ward, Grampian Ward, Rampton Hospital, and I started to write to him. So over the last couple of years I've developed a friendship with him. His story is just absolutely shocking. He's, like I said, he got a minimum term of 2 years, 11 months. He could not progress through the prison system because, number one, there was never anything in place to deal with the IPPs. There never has been any effective case management, nothing that even resembles effective case management for IPPs in the prison system. Because of the knee-jerk implementation and reckless implementation of the sentence, it's just been a case of kind of make it up as they go along. There's a lot of luck involved with regard to geographics. If you're in the right prison, you might get a little bit more help than if you're in another prison. So because of Sean's speech impediment and his partial deafness, he has hearing aids on both ears, conditions that he suffered with for his whole life. He was unable to progress, he was unable to do courses, he was moved from prison to prison to prison, he was in 7 different prisons. He was assessed for the therapeutic community in Dovegate, which is a BCAT training prison in England. The assessor who assessed him in 2009 said that he was not suitable for the Offender Behaviour Programme TC therapeutic community because of his speech impediment. 10 years later, he remains detained indefinitely with no right to release. So it's a very, very sad story. Sean is a very humble man. He does not let anger consume him. He's an inspiration. He remains in good spirits. He's healthy. He takes care of himself. He engages with the doctors at Rampton. He engages with psychology and the psychiatrists. He reads. He talks to his family on the phone. He talks to me on the phone. And the guy's an inspiration really for what he's going through. what's happening with Sean Thomas is, in my opinion, one of the worst miscarriages of justice I've ever seen in my lifetime. I know he's not innocent and he committed a crime, but the length of time that he's been detained is just insane, and the reason why he remains detained indefinitely is for no other reason than the disabilities that he has. So Sean Thomas's offence, he was depressed. He had these lifelong problems with his disabilities, stemming all the way from school. He wanted to kill himself, so he googled suicide by cop. He looked at it, how to do it. He got a toy gun, a fake gun. He waved it at the police. Excuse me. He waved it at the police. They folded him up, arrested him, and that was the offence that he got the IPP sentence for, with the 2-year, 11-month minimum term. So that's the background on Sean. That's the background on my relationship with Sean. So since I've been out in the last 5 months, I've had more contact with him because he's been able to ring me. So I've been talking to him on the phone, arranged the visit. I promised him I'd be there. So I went for 2 days. I went for 2 social visits and then a CPA meeting, which is a meeting with all the doctors, the forensic psychiatrists, the consultant forensic psychologists, all the doctors. I met his mother, his brother Ian, both lovely people. So I'm going to share with you my experience with going up to Rampton. So when I arrived at Retford train station in Nottinghamshire, I came up the stairs and there was a Rampton nurse there waiting for me. She had the card on her, she was smiling, she was welcoming, she picked me up, she arranged to pick me up, she drove me 7 miles to the visitors' accommodation. Just really welcoming, really. Can't knock the staff at all. She took me to the visitor centre. The visitor centre in the Rampton High Secure Hospital grounds was actually a house. It was a 4-bedroom house. It had food in the house, clean bedding, towels, toiletries. There was no other visitors in the house. I had the house to myself. So the lady showed me around. She's very hospitable, very welcoming, and she made a really big impact on me. And she said a couple of things that stuck with me, really. She said to me that patients at Rampton will be there for a long time. The average stay is around 5 to 7 years. So it's important for the staff at Rampton that the visitors are part of the patient's journey, so that it's important that to the staff that I am a part of Sean's journey. And my experience at Rampton the last couple of days definitely made me feel that I was a part of his journey and that I am a part of his journey. So that really stuck with me, what she said when she said that to me. She also said that the welcoming that they give to the visitors who visit patients at Rampton is important to the Rampton hospital staff, because they want the visitors to quickly build trust with the staff and belief in the staff that they're taking care of the patients. And again, I would say my experience there in the last couple of days, I definitely feel like I trust the staff there to take care of Sean, not only take care of Sean Thomas, but to deliver the highest standards of care. I have to say that. So I've gone in for the social visit the next morning. I met a guy, a staff member called Adam, been there 15 years, just highly professional, absolutely fantastic. I didn't feel judged in any way or demonised because I knew somebody in there, like when you go into a prison. There was no bars on the windows, something I noticed. This is an issue at the moment in England, which journalist Raphael Rowe has written about. So Raphael Rowe has done 3 series of World's Toughest Prisons on Netflix, and he was a BBC Panorama correspondent for 16 years. and prior to that he spent 12 years in prison for a murder that he did not commit until it was overturned at the Court of Appeal in London. So this man has a wealth of expertise and experience. Unlike the loose women on ITV who were quick to make a judgment about bars on cell windows. So what I would say to the ladies on Loose Women is stick to what you're good at, which is commentating on things like I'm a celebrity, get out of here, and leave the criminal justice system to the experts. That's what I would say to Loose Women in that regard. So Raphael Rowe has spoken about this. I'll put the link in the description about what he wrote about this, but my experience, the perception of an institution walking around there with no bars on the windows is just worlds away from the perception you get when you walk into a prison with bars on the windows. Bars on the windows for me represent oppression, cruelty, torture. It makes no difference if the bars are there or not. The person can't get out of the cell. So yeah, the bars represent very much so the draconian and Victorian, outdated, 200-year-old prison system that we have in modern 21st century Britain at the moment. You know, this is the highest secure hospital in the land, but I never felt when I was in there that I was in a prison, or I was even in a hospital, or I was in an institution. There was always an escort with me. I was never left alone for more than 10 seconds. You know, there was always somebody there who was professional and walking me round and building rapport with me and talking with me. The grounds were immaculate, no bars on the windows, no banging and shouting and screaming and all that kind of stuff that you get in prisons. So that was one of the things that I noticed, that not the hospital having no bars on the windows. Excuse me. So yeah, I mean, the prison service can learn so much from an institution like Rampton. Small units, small capacity, small population, small wards, high staff to patient ratio, low staff turnover. You know, it's just the complete opposite end of the spectrum to our broken prison system. You know, this stuff isn't rocket science. So it's got a capacity of about 300, 350. So yeah, successful small units, excuse me, as opposed to Titan prisons that you see in America, the mass warehousing. They built a Titan prison here in England, or in Wales actually, that was supposed to hold around about 1,800 or 2,000 inmates. Inevitably, you know, that prison has been a failure. This was the Ministry of Justice, British government flagship prison, 200 million, 220 million. Got architects to design it, and you know, no blind spots, cameras everywhere. Lo and behold, inevitably, after only opening a few months, Wrexham police in Wales had multiple reports of violence, stabbings, mobile phones, drug epidemic. There's been suicides there recently and inquests. So you're starting to see the same problems as you are seeing in all of the prisons in England and Wales that are dilapidated, Victorian and draconian in the Ministry of Justice flagship prison. Titan prisons do not work. They're a catastrophic failure in America, characterised by murder, mental health epidemics, the murder of prison officers, extreme violence, gangs, gang rape, sexual assaults, suicides, and they are a breeding ground, a school of crime for the pro-criminal attitudes and criminally entrenched beliefs and behaviours and attitudes that led the people to be incarcerated and detained in the first place. So modern thinking penal reformers will consider this dialogue, what I'm saying here, in the fact that small units are effective and are characterised by community and personal change and recovery. Big mass incarceration, mass warehousing is just characterised by all the misery and trauma and death and human suffering. including human suffering to the prison officers, the COs, the correctional officers, like I outlined a few moments ago. And mass incarceration, tightened prisons harm society. They don't help society, they harm society, they harm victims, and they're a conveyor belt for future victims of crime also. So this isn't rocket science. Lots of staff to prisoner ratio is the modern approach, the effective approach. So good leadership, strong leadership, low staff turnover. So at Rampton, even though the guy said to me he'd been there 15 years, that Rampton has a low staff turnover, he did say there was an influx of new young professional staff. That's a good thing. They are the next generation of academics, the young academics, next generation of academics, professionals, prison officers, hospital staff, penal reformers, modern thinking penal reformers, and modern thinking academics, modern thinking professionals. Those are my audience. Those are the people I'm trying to get my message across to. So the most successful businesses and organisations in the world that nail their mission statements on a daily basis and who are the most highest revenue generating organisations in the world do not have low staff turnover. High staff turnover. They have low staff turnover. Their staff don't leave, and the reason for that is because the customer does not come first. The client does not come first. So in the case of the prison service, the customer in that regard would be the public. And all the most successful leaders of times gone by and entrepreneurs know that it is your staff that come first. Look after your staff and rest assured your staff will take care of the client or customer, or in the case of the prison service in this regard, and in this instant, the public. That's a fact. That's a fact. So, yeah, look after your staff, they'll take care of the client. Our broken prison system and criminal justice system, this dilapidated Victorian draconian horror show, needs to be revolutionised with the emphasis on victims, and these systems need to be catapulted into the 21st century. This revolution in criminal justice will be driven from and born from a foundation where the emphasis is on the victims of crime. Victims of crime in the United Kingdom are treated disgustingly. It's despicable the way victims of crime are treated. They have no input into the justice system. The way they're treated when they are witnesses in Crown Court trials, some very lengthy, long trials, is just shocking. They have once the person convicted goes to prison, they have no input whatsoever. I'll tell you a story about a guy called Ray and his wife Vi, who I met on a restorative justice program in prison. But the government have cut these courses so much over the years that they're just dying out. So there's a handful of restorative justice programs that are going on, and this is where I met Ray and Vi. Now, Ray and Vi's son was savagely beaten by 4 or 5 lads, killed, murdered. Only a young lad down the road from his house. And when Ray and Vi were in the Crown Court trial, the judge told them to leave the court because they were crying and could influence the jury. And when he was telling us this story, it was just incredible, really, that the judge would tell them to leave and treat them like that way when they're sitting there at a murder trial for the murder of their son. Also, when the body was with the police, I'm not sure where he said the body was, but the police had control over the body. They would not let the mother and the father, Ray and Vi, see the body for ages went by, and they just, minimal support, just treated horrendously. And do you know what? Like, when one of these lads came out of prison after he'd completed his life sentence for murder, Ray gave him a job. He gave him a job. He forgave him and gave him a job. And even when he tells this story today, he gets emotional and upset and tears roll down his face. You know, they took his son away, but he forgave them. It's just an incredibly powerful story. I'll never forget that man and wife, never. They taught me a lot about forgiveness. So, where are we? Okay, so... Yes, I've explained about Ray and V. So yeah, victims of crime are not just treated horrendously in modern 21st century Britain by Ministry of Justice and Westminster and our consecutive failing justice secretaries and consecutive failing governments. It's also the media. The hysterical media stridence and sophism that is very much alive and kicking in 21st century Britain, which is the lifeblood of the dangerousness Renaissance era, the post-Bulger, post-Sarah Payne, Tony Blair driven politicisation of law and order era, the dangerousness era. The media, the hysterical media, is the lifeblood of that dangerousness Renaissance. So what the media do in modern 21st century Britain, they systematically target high-profile criminal cases to sow mass fear and mass hysteria amongst society, and to push state-controlled political agendas to sell newspapers for profit, and the cost is and continues to be and will ever increase, you know, at this frightening rate, an ocean of blood and immeasurable mass human suffering, and like I said previously, the you know, and on other videos, the complete decimation of great British values that have been the glue that has held this great nation together for hundreds of years. Justice, reason, the rule of law, the common law of the land of Great Britain, individual liberty, freedom from discrimination, and innocence or proven guilty. You know, trial by media is the norm now. It is the norm. And we need to apply some modern thinking around this stuff. A Crown Court judge can't say to a 12-member jury anymore, don't talk about the case, you're dismissed, because they just go straight on their smartphones and Google the person, and if they've got anything in their background, it's going to come up. So, you know, that draconian Victorian way is just not working. So modern thinking penal reformers and academics and professionals will consider this. So hysterical media stridence and sophism in modern 21st century Britain is the lifeblood of the dangerousness Renaissance. And what these journalists do at the Daily Mail and the Mirror and the Sun, they hide in trees. After a man is completed the punitive part of his life sentence and he has been downgraded to a low secure prison, like a DCAT prison, and he might be going out on town visits or home leaves, these journalists hide in trees and bushes to get a photo of the person, and then they go to the victim's mother 20 years after the crime was committed and they dig up trauma, they dig up pain, they dig up trauma, suffering and pain, all for the reasons I said earlier, to sell newspapers for profit, to push political ideology, and it's absolutely disgusting. And this stuff is harming our society. It's harming victims of crime. And something needs to be done about it. Something does need to be done about it. It's just terrible. The recent high-profile case that the mainstream media have targeted has been, or one of them, has been the case of Kenny Noy. Kenny Noy has completed his sentence. He was in a DCAT prison, and these journalists were hiding in bushes, hiding in trees, getting photos of him to put his photo in the paper. And they go into the victim, I think the victim's name was Stephen Cameron, they're going to his mother's house, digging up the trauma to get an interview. And what they're trying to do, these journalists, they're trying to hijack Kenny Noy's parole hearing, and they're trying to influence the parole board to keep him in prison instead of releasing him. So another case of trial by media. So where are we? Let's have a look at these bullet points. So what I experienced in Rampton in the last couple of days, like I've said, it's the complete opposite of the spectrum of what I've experienced in prison. The two are just worlds apart. So in Great Britain, at this moment in time, we harm prisoners. To harm a prisoner is to harm society, and to harm a prisoner is to harm the victims. To treat prisoners with dignity is to care about society. To treat prisoners with dignity is to care about victims of crime. And to treat prisoners with dignity is to prevent crime and to prevent future victims of crime. This isn't to say that there shouldn't be punishments in place. You have these heinous crimes that are committed in Britain. So, I'm not for one moment advocating that people like Ian Huntley should, a double child killer should be sitting up there in HMP Franklin in a category A dispersal prison watching TV with his feet up eating chicken dinners on a Sunday. I've got a plan for Ian Huntley, believe me, and it doesn't involve sitting up there in Franklin eating chicken dinners on a Sunday. I will be doing videos about child killers and people like Ian Huntley on Criminal Justice TV in the near future in 2019. And I'll be applying modern thinking to find ways to deal with child killers, which offers proportionate justice for victims, which does its utmost to prevent future crimes like that by other people in the future, because we're failing. The modern British prison system and criminal justice system is failing our children. And despite Westminster's efforts with specific sentences for so-called dangerous offenders and such, we still have child killers, and we have done for donkey's years, years and years and decades and decades and decades we've had child killers, and something needs to be done about it. So in Rampton, they were walking around the grounds there, talking to the staff and looking at the grounds and stuff. The staff were telling me at Rampton Hospital that they're growing tomatoes there, they've got chickens, the staff buy the eggs, the patients make hanging baskets, flower baskets, which the staff buy off them. Again, this is the kind of modern thinking we need to revolutionise our criminal justice system with an emphasis on victims. Get someone like Peter Jones or Tuka Sullivan. These guys will school the Ministry of Justice and Westminster how to run and build cost-effective prisons with an emphasis on victims. This is the kind of thinking we need. We need these kind of advanced, sophisticated, entrepreneurial thinking type dudes to help us to revolutionise our criminal justice system. This is what we need. Everywhere I looked in Rampton, everywhere I went, it's quite a big place, even though it's got a small capacity of patients compared to other institutions. Everywhere I looked and went, there was up-to-date computers, up-to-date phones, there was constant communication between all of the staff. Everybody knew what they would do, and everybody was earning their money. They weren't sitting there drinking coffee and eating donuts like you see in prisons all around England and Wales. And that's not to say that some officers don't work hard, because they do. But there's way too much sitting around eating donuts and drinking coffee when there could be work being done. But that's obviously, poor leadership. You blame the leaders and the managers with that situation, and it's low morale in the prison service as well. So, we have to look at all these kind of factors. But the reason I want to raise this point about this high level of accurate information between all the professionals at Rampton is because the up-to-date, accurate flow and sharing of information, good and bad, about a prisoner or a patient between all multidisciplinary teams and professionals working and managing that patient or prisoner, that is critical for public protection, absolutely critical. So we saw, how does this play out in practice? Well, we saw in the John Warboys case that his parole dossier had documents that were missing, which could have been detrimental to the release decision. Those documents were missing. The parole board then concluded a recommendation for release, which was later blocked after successful judicial review hearing by the victims of his crimes. So that shows you, that's another example of the car crash that is the information sharing within the prison estate of those that are in custody. We've also seen recently, I'll just get this bookmark up, we've also seen recently a case which came out on the news just recently, a couple of days ago, on the 24th of January 2019, a lady by the name of Lisa Skidmore. So a probation officer has actually been sacked because Leroy Campbell, who's 57 years old, who was a convicted sex offender, he told his probation officer during supervision, during a probation appointment, that he was going to rape again, he was going to rape another victim again. Nothing was done about it, and then Leroy Campbell then went ahead and raped and strangled Lisa Skidmore, attempted to murder her elderly mother, and then set fire to a property in Wolverhampton, and this happened in 2016. Another probation officer involved with this case, with Campbell, Leroy Campbell, has been demoted to an administrative role. It says here, this is sourced from the BBC, the review into Miss Skidmore's murder found that the probation service should have acted to protect the public from Campbell. But this is an example of what I spoke about the poor quality of information sharing. So we're sending rockets and spaceships to Mars, but in the prison service, it's dilapidated radios, snail-paced computers, a paper general application system, information is not updated, good or bad, and this is inevitably the cost. So it's critical for modern thinking penal reformers and academics to consider this kind of stuff in moving forward and revolutionising our criminal justice system. So that's the consequence. Lisa Skidmore, failed by probation, failed by a broken prison system, failed by poor quality information sharing. If the information sharing had been accurate, up to date, there's no doubt in my mind that that lady wouldn't have died. They'd have spotted the behaviours in Leroy, and they'd have had him back in prison before he could have reoffended and harmed another victim. So, so the government, successive failing governments in abandoning our broken prison system have abandoned society. They've abandoned victims of crime. They are failing dismally in preventing future victims of crime, and we now have the highest recidivism figures in the entire of Western Europe. Our prisons, young offenders institutions and secure units are schools of crime, and they create a conveyor belt of victims, and they constantly and consistently harm society and cost the taxpayer billions and billions of pounds. It's time for Westminster to accept and admit that the politicisation of law and order by the new Labour Blair government in their 10-year reign is an epic failure. It's time for Westminster to accept that a revolution in criminal justice with an emphasis on victims, and a revolution that brings our draconian and Victorian criminal justice system and prison system into the 21st century, in conjunction with the advances and merging the advances in technology into this revolution, and advances not just in technology but in medicine and in neuropsychology and all these other relevant fields where there's been massive advances. It's time for the British government and Westminster to accept that they can't run this show anymore. They cannot run it. We're destroying our country. We're destroying our justice system. Our justice system can no longer be regarded as the best in the world. The President of the Supreme Court, who's a lady, said recently in the last 3 or 4 months that the reputation of the British judiciary is hanging by a thread. Well, I've got news for you, President of the Supreme Court. It's done. The reputation of the British judiciary is finished. It's nowhere near the best in the world anymore. The IPP sentence has been a massive factor in that. The cuts to legal aid, you've got barristers on strike all over the place, refusing to take on trials. The cuts to the legal aid have made justice, the road to justice for vulnerable and marginalised groups in modern 21st century Britain, impossible. I mean, it just is impossible for these people to get justice. Look at Sean Thomas, can't get justice, cannot get solicitor. The meeting I went to at Rampton, solicitor didn't even turn up. I mean, it's just shocking what's going on. So yeah, so it was very sad for me to see Sean in Rampton Hospital. It was sad for me to see a man who is detained in this high profile, high secure hospital which houses the most dangerous men in the United Kingdom. You know, he's not innocent. He committed the crime. He waved the toy gun at the police. He never put his hand on anybody. So it was sad for me to see him in there. 14 years on a 2-year, 11-month tariff, detained due to disabilities which have prevented his progression. Sean Thomas has never had a sentence plan. He's never had anything that even resembles a sentence plan. When they were sending him round from prison to prison, never had a sentence plan. The Tony Blair government wanted to give the IPP sentence to 25,000 people because he believed there was around about 90 or 100,000 of these kind of dangerous, violent and sexual offenders that he wanted, that were committing, you know, all sorts of different violent and sexual crimes prolifically. So he wanted to give it to 25,000 people. In 2010, 5 years after the implementation of IPP in the courts in April 2005, the Prison Governors Association were bombarding the Ministry of Justice and saying, stop sending us these IPPs, there's nowhere to put them. So then that's when the plans for the Titan prisons, they wanted to build bigger prisons, mass warehousing, fill up the prisons with IPPs, life sentence IPPs, indefinite prison terms, and just mass incarcerate them. That was Tony Blair's plan. So all these IPPs who are detained indefinitely, who are in secure hospitals, who are being drugged, housed with psychopaths and killers, even though they haven't took life. What you need to understand is that all the past, current and future self-inflicted IPP suicides, and the 70% of self-harming amongst the 2,600 IPP prisoner population in England and Wales, that's 70% of that population are self-harming. That self-harming, the immeasurable human suffering of these men suffering delirium and catastrophic breakdown in their mental functioning, the mass human suffering to their friends, their family, their children, who are just sitting there thinking, 14 years has gone by, my son, my brother, my partner's still in prison, my father's still in prison on a 2-year tariff. All of this death, this trauma, these suicides, make no mistake, this state of affairs, it is an accepted political collateral damage of the Theresa May Conservative government in maintaining their power. They just will not pass the necessary retrospective legislation to resolve this carnage and this massacre that is IPP. They just won't do it. They're not prepared to take the political hit, so they're an accepted political collateral damage, and that's what they do. They sit in Westminster and they decide on who lives and dies. Successive failing justice secretaries at the Ministry of Justice in modern Great Britain. So we've had 5 successive justice secretaries in 7 years. They've rarely, if ever, got any background in criminal justice or law or psychology or psychiatry or any of those kind of disciplines. They normally come on the scene with backgrounds in agriculture and Edwardian Elizabethan history and fiddling expenses. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, it's like a comic strip, but it's not funny because people are dying. It's just incredible. During the time of the implementation of IPP, the Blair government, David Blunkett, Jack Straw and Tony Blair, they took all the discretion from the judges and forced them to pass these IPP sentences. So they took all the discretion away from the courts and the judges. Judges have been doing this job, for years, worked in law, for their whole adult lives, and studied it. And they also, what they did at the time, the New Labour government, they stopped listening to academics, to criminal justice experts, stopped listening to think tanks, stopped, everybody told them not to implement IPP, and they did it anyway. The Tony Blair government used the graves of dead toddlers, Jamie Bulger and Sarah Payne, and then later on the IPP sentence, and they did all this to win elections and maintain their power and secure their power in Parliament. And it's just absolutely disgusting again, and we can never again underestimate the devastation to our country and our country's values and the cost of blood and human suffering when ministers and politicians and governments do these kind of things, when they lie to us, when they politicise law and order, You know, they need to accept defeat now and hand it over to the people who know what they're doing, and they need to trust in them and to allow them to revolutionise and spearhead a revolution in criminal justice with the emphasis on victims. So, where are we? Let's have a look. So yeah, when I spoke about the flagship Ministry of Justice prison in Wales, HMP Berwyn, so this was the flagship Ministry of Justice prison, 220 million. And what that example shows you, or is an example of, is the consistent approach from successive justice secretaries to our broken prison system. And this approach is an approach of symptom resolution. So modern penal reformers, modern thinkers, modern academics will look at problem resolution, and they will go to the source of the problem and play the long game. Successive failing justice secretaries, every time they try and implement change, it's always symptom resolution. So the HMP Berwyn, the Titan prison, is an example of that. There's no correlation with any reduction in crime, along with all those 6,000 IPP sentences that they gave out. So another example recently by the Justice Secretary David Gauke of symptom resolution is the 30 million he's just recently invested and allocated into preventing drones carrying drugs into prisons, airport security. So he selected this handful of prisons to invest and pump this 30 million into. So it's a short-term fix. You might as well burn that 30 million and watch it go up in smoke, because that's what's going to happen to that 30 million. If you observe history and you observe the way of man, wherever there's a will, there's a way. Wherever there's a loophole, man will exploit it. So as soon as they secure drones from going into these handful of prisons with this 30 million in the airport security, prisoners will just find another way. That's how it works. You imagine the difference if David Gauke had have pumped that 30 million into updating the technology and the computer systems, and pumping that 30 million into creating systems which in a small number of prisons which enable all professionals and all teams of multidisciplinary professionals to have up-to-date flows of information with regards to all the prisoners in that prison. That would prevent crime. That would prevent future victims. That would help society and not harm society. The 30 million that David Gauke has recently invested will eventually harm society, because prisoners will just find other ways and means. They'll find a loophole, and you've just burnt the cash. You've just absolutely burnt the cash. I mean, this politician, David Gauke, I mean, he is just clueless. You're talking clueless, low IQ, clueless politician, hasn't got the slightest idea what he's doing, and they're just, one after the other, these justice secretaries are just sending our prison system to hell. So modern thinkers and modern thinking penal reformers, academics and professionals, the new generation, they will think about what I've just said with regard to the allocation of money and how it's spent and what areas it's spent on, and whether it's and the benefits of spending it on looking at the source of the problem with regard to symptom resolution. You know, modern thinkers will look at problem resolution and play the long game, which has an emphasis on victims and crime reduction and treating prisoners with dignity. So my experience with visiting Sean Thomas in Rampton has been an experience which has reminded me of the way, again at the opposite end of the spectrum, that visitors are treated in prisons. So So on the one side of the spectrum, you've got Rampton, highest quality of care imaginable, best doctors in the country. Every member of staff you see and meet just breathe that mission statement, that fiery sense of mission, of care, recovery, personal change. I mean, the place is just shining with it, and making the visitor feel part of the journey of the person who's detained there. The situation with the visits in prisons is terrible. It's been like that for 30, 40 years. It hasn't changed. It's draconian, Victorian. And what's interesting is where that nurse at Rampton said to me she wanted to make it was important for Rampton staff for me to be a part of Sean's journey. Now, the situation in modern 21st Britain is this: if a man goes to prison for 10 years in a prison in Great Britain, he could do that whole 10 years without ever once having a social visit from anybody, any family member, any friend, and nobody will even question him. Not one member of staff will ever say, why don't you get any visits? So the consequence of that is that the prisoner becomes isolated. This is one of the factors in prisoners becoming radicalised, like Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, who's currently detained in Colorado, Supermax CDX, I think it's called, up there with Abu Hamza, living in concrete tombs for the rest of their lives. Khalid Massoud, the Westminster Bridge attacker, he was radicalised in Wayland. I was in Wayland for 5 years, and I know that boys in Wayland, lads in Wayland, young men in Wayland were discussing bomb plots in the capital, in the mosque there. You know, and Khalid Massoud was radicalised there. So this isolation from the outside world is a part of people becoming radicalised, and that's how it is in prison. The prison servers, they put signs up in visiting rooms and print leaflets saying that they strive to the highest standards of maintaining family links and ties with family members of a prisoner, but that's fake news. They might as well rip them signs down because it isn't true, period. It's just not true. Like I said, I gave the example with a prisoner being in prison for years, doesn't get a visit, nobody even bats an eyelid. So that's a point I wanted to make. The current state of affairs with prison visits and communication with the outside world for prisoners harms society, creates more victims, does not offer the victims of crime the proportionate justice that they deserve, and creates more crime in the future. If you're in prison at the moment in modern Britain and you're trying to put a family phone number or a phone number of a friend on a PIN phone on your to be passed to put on your phone so you can ring them, it can take up to 3 months for that to happen. If you call a prison and say that somebody's self-harming in a prison, like I did last week, and the week before and the week before that, they put me through to safer custody and the phone rings out. So I phone back, I say, can I speak to a duty governor? They say there's nobody there. They put me on hold, then they put me on hold again. Then they put me through to safer custody, the phone rings out. So I'm ringing back, I'm saying this person is vulnerable, he's self-harming, he's got poor mental health, I'm very worried about him, can I please speak to somebody? Put me through to safer custody, the phone rings out. Just imagine if that was your son, I mean, or your partner, or your father, or your mother, but that's the state of affairs at the moment. The priority for a prison governor in the 120, 130 prisons in England and Wales at this moment in time in modern Britain, when they walk into work every day at 7 o'clock, is not to uphold the mission statement which is on the wall, which is to detain those sent by the courts and to treat them with dignity and to help them lead law-abiding and useful lives. The priority of that governor in each of them prisons all over the country is, have I got enough staff to prevent a prison officer being murdered? Have I got enough staff to prevent a riot leading to major loss of life? And have I got enough staff to prevent a high-profile escape? And that's it. That's it. That mission statement might as well be ripped off the wall, because that's the unfortunate state of affairs. I've got no confidence in any prison governor in any prison in the United Kingdom in being able to uphold that mission statement effectively and with good leadership, and to safeguard prisoners' right to life. Prisoners are dying all over the land, kicking their door and screaming at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, crying for listeners and Samaritans with their emergency cell bell on, left flashing for 2 hours and then stringing up and killing themselves. It's happening all the time, all around the country, and this is unforgivable for the 7th richest country in the world, a civilized nation such as Great Britain. Even in the toughest prison on the continent, in Europe, in Black Dolphin, in Russia, the right to life is protected. It's impossible to kill yourself. Impossible. Watch the documentary on YouTube. I'll put the link in the description. It's impossible to die there. You know, even in that toughest prison in Europe, the right to life is protected. Very, very interesting. So, where are we? So yeah, I'm going to wrap this video up now. I just want to say that with regards to Rampton, my fantastic experience there with the doctors, all the staff, just the complete opposite spectrum of the prison service. I just want to say that I would attribute that to the leadership, because great teams, you know, make great things happen. Great teams achieve great things, and they're achieving great things at Rampton, and they need a lot of credit and they deserve a lot of respect. They're hard workers, they've got great leadership, they've got great morals, they're highly trained, they're fantastic staff, and I could not praise them enough. I'm just, you know, so Sean is being taken care of, but he shouldn't be detained, but he is being taken care of. You know, staff live and breathe the mission statement there at Rampton, and, you know, full credit to them. I sat in a meeting with 13 people: Sean, his mother, his brother, a number of doctors, psychologists, forensic psychiatrists, and what I observed there was the highest standard of care delivery, complete unconditional positive regard, the highest adherence to ethical codes of conduct and frameworks. Again, the complete opposite of what you see in the prison service. So the prison service and modern thinking penal reformers, academics and professionals can learn a lot from the model at Rampton, and that's what I would say to those people moving forward. So yeah, it's not rocket science. Small units, high numbers of staff. You know, and you get the prisoner in a room. It doesn't matter if he's serving 3 months or 30 years. You get the prisoner in a room and you surround him with professionals and experts, and you work with the person. This is how you give proportionate justice to a victim of crime. This is how you prevent future victims of crime, by working this person out and learning from them to prevent it happening again. Why should Ian Huntley be sitting up there in Franklin eating chicken dinners? They should be doing MRI scans on his brain and learning about his brain and trying to understand his brain, to try and learn something from him to prevent it happening again.
I got the perfect original correct.